Here we go. Hey everybody, it's almost an agreement time. I got a special one. It's kind of neat. We're getting to that place where people are calling on us to talk about things with or without me chasing them down. So that's kind of neat. So I've got, I'm going to butcher the last name, Jack. We'll just say Jack S for simplicity's sake, from ACLU, Tennessee. They're doing a webinar on Thursday the 5th on some of the surveillance or spying, whichever word you like better, that the KPD does here in Knoxville. If you guys remember, I kind of went on a tirade about trying to understand some of the stuff going on with, there was a state Senate bill that was expanding the use that KPD was going to be able to use the drones that they have with. And I had a really hard time understanding what those things are, how it works, what they're allowed to do currently, what they're trying to ask for more of, and stuff like that. So hopefully Jack's here to help explain some of that, so we get a better understanding of that kind of thing. We're almost in agreement at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. Almostinagreement.com /cityelections21. It's my cheat guide for this city election coming up. So that's that part of it. ACLU-TN Jack S is with us. I'll have him pronounce his name so I don't screw it up. So that's that. Welcome, Jack.
Hey, Seth. Thanks for having me.
You want to try to say that name for me?
Yeah, Jack Siegenthaler. It's got like 1,000 syllables.
It's Jack Siegenthaler. All right, so that's what we're here to talk about today. So we're not here to talk about your last name. We're here to talk about what's going on with this webinar and what's the general theme as far as that kind of stuff goes. So I don't know. Let's start with like a little bit of an origin story of you and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis with the ACLU and how you got to this point, and then we'll talk about some of the specifics going on locally here for me.
Sure, yeah. So I am a policy strategist for the American Civil Liberties Union of Tennessee, and what that means is I do work on our legislative agenda, whether that's looking at policy at the state or on the local level. Now, a little background on this issue in particular. A couple of years ago, the ACLU started a program called Community Control Over Police Surveillance, or CCOPS. And the goal of this effort was to try to get laws on the books in cities across the country to promote accountability and transparency around surveillance technology.
Okay.
So over the past decades, police have acquired new high-tech capabilities to surveil residents. And these technologies give police, real new powers to peer into residents' lives. So we've been looking to open conversations around police surveillance in communities across the country, and that's why we're hosting a webinar on August 5th to talk a little bit more about this issue.
Right, because as it goes, I'm of the I've always been trying to figure out what the better argument was, but I'm always of the general ilk of it's none of your business.
Yeah.
Period. You don't, the whole point of the warrant process and all these other things is that you need to have a good reason to start looking into people. You can't just be like, oh, well, you're a citizen, so I get to know whatever I want to know about you. It's you have no right to privacy, which is not the way this thing is supposed to be set up. And like, especially on some of the surveillance stuff, especially with the technology, it's getting more intrusive and more invasive, but less noticeable. And I think that's the biggest thing that, and why it's an issue, is that it's hard to see it. It's not like there's a cruiser sitting out in my front yard and a guy with binoculars looking in my windows. This is, getting into some of the really high-tech stuff, especially specifically the drones where, some of those little police drones, you can barely notice them if they're 100 feet up in the air, but they can take pictures of your face like they're right in front of you.
Yeah. And, when it comes to these technologies, you may not know which technologies police departments are in possession of, and like you said, you may not be able to see them. So we submitted an open records request to the Knoxville Police Department a few months ago to try to figure out like what technologies does KPD have in their sort of surveillance arsenal. And we found at least 3 technologies that have raised red flags for us and have been subject to abuse and misuse in communities across the country. So the first is license plate readers, or LPRs, which are these high-speed cameras that can take a picture of your license plate, convert that into computer-readable data, and then store the location and the time the photo was taken. So you get enough of these cameras around, you get enough of these photos, you can track anybody anywhere throughout your city, whether that's home or to work.
Okay. Okay. See, I didn't realize it was that part of it. My understanding was that it is like, they're reading them and it's like, the owner of, or the registered owner of the vehicle has a warrant out or something out that would cue the officer to pull you over then and there. I didn't even think of it and that they're storing said data. And it's like, well, we saw Jack's car at this intersection at this time, and then we saw his car at this intersection at this time. And you start compiling all that together, and all of a sudden we have a picture of what you do every day, all day, where you're going, what you're doing.
Right. And our organization has said there can be some, legitimate government uses for this technology. But if you broaden the scope and you just keep lapping up this data, you can compile a really massive database of where folks are going. And most of the license, because the license plate, the camera can't just be capturing the license plates of, certain people. It's anybody in the camera's view.
Right.
So for example, in Maryland, the ACLU studied over a period of time, there were about 1 million license plate data points collected. And it was something like 50 that triggered responses that were tied to crimes that these plate readers were actually looking for. So the other 999,500 were just folks going about their day.
Right, just innocent passerbys being surveilled without their knowledge, and without their permission. Right.
So LPRs have been a real point of concern for us, since they've been rolled out in police departments in the early 2010s or before. Then there's drones, like you mentioned. KPD has a program of drone surveillance, and drones, I think, are a good example of how surveillance technology has changed over the past few decades. It used to be if you wanted to surveil somebody from the sky, you had to fly a helicopter up there. And, your police department might only be able to afford one helicopter, just one helicopter.
Right. And when you do use it, it's quite pricey. And so you're not just going to do it for shits and giggles, as they say. You're going to be a little bit more targeted with it because of the cost involved, where the drones takes that cost out of the question. Because, I got my kid one for Christmas last year, and it's not like a world changer, but it was like $120, and it takes some pretty good pictures from 50 feet in the air. But I assume, like most things, the one that I have at home that I bought for $120, there's a $5,000 version of it that can take crystal clear images from way up in the sky. You can't even see it.
Yeah, and on top of all that, if somebody's flying in a helicopter, you can hear it and you can see it.
Right.
And like you said, with drones, you can't always hear it or see it. On top of all that, in our open records request, we saw emails that KPD officers had exchanged with a state legislator's office. They were offering comment on a bill to expand allowable uses of drone surveillance.
Correct.
And KPD wanted to ensure that one allowable use was to use drones to watch protests and to spy on protests. So drones, when paired with all these high-powered cameras or audiovisual devices, or even radar imaging, can be a whole new opportunity.
So do we know? I apologize. I have two questions on specifically on the drone that you. I couldn't find I was trying to look into the budget because one of the things we have going on in the broader sense of things is there's a big budgetary conversation. How much are we paying individual officers? How many officers do we have on staff, and this, that, and the other? And so it's budget, budget, budget. In your open records request, did you happen to see anything about the cost? Is there a specific officer that is assigned this duty, or is there a small department that has a total overhead fund that they get to do their, drone usage with, as well as the cost of these license plate readers and other things? And again, I don't know if you have the specific numbers, but it was a curiosity when I started talking to you guys last week about, this is in the middle of a big budget conversation, and it's like, well, this isn't free. It's not helicopter expensive, like you said earlier, but it's not free either. And when one of the complaints from a lot of our city council members is we can't keep officers because we're not paying them enough. Well, how much are we spending on a program like this that, at least for you and I, maybe not everybody, but I think everybody should be a little bit more questionable on this scenario that we're talking about. But, when you have a budget problem and you have a thing that a good number of people are opposed to that's taking a chunk of budget, those kind of things, I guess I'm interested if you have any knowledge on that particular of it.
Yeah, so I don't have specific numbers in front of me, but I will say that we'll be posting the entirety of the open records response on our website. And there are invoices for at least the license plate reader cameras that and how much police have spent
right, because
on at least.
Because, just to ramble on that for a second, if you think about that, what'd you say, Maryland had like 1 million data points and 50 things of useful. So how much did it cost to get 50 useful pieces of information?
Right. Yeah. And that's a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah. So the other thing on this is, the goal of the CCOPS effort is to try to bring conversations about costs into the light. So, officers might say, hey, we're buying these technologies as a force multiplier, or we're buying these technologies for the purpose of operational efficiency. And that may be true, that may not be true. These things can cost a whole lot of money and they can run up real quick. But if you look at the Knoxville budget, it's not always clear from your line items how much is being spent on drones. It might just be X department and supplies or services. Right. And it's not always easy for your legislative body to amend by line item in the budgeting process. And so this legislative effort, the goal is, hey, we're going to bring that process into the public eye, and we're going to get a full accounting of what the costs are from a monetary perspective, and also what the costs are to privacy for residents.
Right, because and to me personally, like the dollar bill cost is an issue, but it's the philosophical. I've been on a long rant about how, like, I think in the most part, this, the 2020 year, as crazy as it was and all that stuff, it just, to me, kind of underscored the us and them that is the police and the public. And when we're talking about something like this, where it's real low key and it's really unclear and all this kind of stuff, when the philosophy is that I'm a free citizen. I'm allowed to do what I need to do. It's none of your business what I'm doing. And again, I'm begging you for any assistance in a better version of the argument than it's just none of your business. But that's the best one I've come up with so far. I'm allowed to have privacy, and I should be allowed to have privacy. And when we're spending real dollars and real resources and real effort to take those privacies away in very shady, for lack of a better word, in very low key, trying to keep it off the radar. So, even people like you who are tasked by your profession to try to seek these things out have to do a lot more work than, because again, the point for me in the show is that it's average guy. I'm just a dude. I'm just a guy that lives in Knoxville trying to understand what's going on around me. The odds of me figuring that out without this show, without getting a guest like you or some of the other legislative people that I've had in here trying to get me a better understanding it, the odds of my neighbors have any idea how much is going on, what's going on, how much it costs. And the assumption that it's like, well, I'm not doing anything bad, so it doesn't matter to me. And it's like, well, one day it will. And it's going to change at some point, and at some point the shoe's going to drop, and all of a sudden all these things that you just said okay to because it wasn't your problem are going to become your problem, and then we all have to try to fix it. But like most government things, once they don't get back.
Yeah, yeah, and I think on the privacy, the sort of none of your business argument, our organization has always been on that side. But on top of that, it's like throughout history, folks have tried to say, in the name of safety and security, we got to give up certain civil liberties. So what was that? Socialist pamphlets in World War I, or Japanese internment in World War II, or the Patriot Act, or the rights of immigrants during the Trump. I mean, it's always this perceived trade-off between safety and security and certain core values and rights. And our organization's always been on the side of, in good times and in bad, we should seek to protect those values. The second piece of that is that trade-off is really often a perceived trade-off. Like, there's not a whole lot of good evidence here that dragnet surveillance technologies do a whole lot to lessen crime.
Right.
That there's not compelling evidence that the more tech you buy, the less people are going to do the kinds of things you want to prevent. On the other hand, the risks to privacy, the disproportionate impacts on Black and Brown communities, on low-income communities, and the chilling effects on speech or free expression, those are of real concern when it comes to these technologies.
Right.
So, yeah, that argument is. It's often not made with a whole lot of specificity, and it often doesn't hold a lot of water.
Right, and and again, that to restate what you stated, it's like I could understand an individual who actually understands the trade-off, being willing to give up X for safety, but when you're giving up X and the safety's not really coming with it, what's the point? You're just giving up, you're giving up your right to X, Y, or Z. In the situation, and I agree. I think that's one of the. I think again that's that layman argument. Well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, it's not that big a deal. And it's like, you might be right, but what are you getting for what you're giving up? Nothing, or next to nothing, or you get all these weird situations where it's just, I don't know. Like, it's one of those things. It's one of the few things that I've had any concern with in doing this podcast is I am now putting on record a lot of things, and I'm putting it out to the world. And in the world that we're living in now, keeping a record of your thought process can get you in trouble tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on that point of ineffectiveness, there was a third bucket of surveillance technology that we found KPD was using. That's sort of a red flag for us. Amazon owns Ring, which is a networked surveillance doorbell tech. So you can throw a camera on your doorbell and be accruing footage of what's going on right outside your house. Amazon has negotiated agreements with thousands of police departments across the country, including Knoxville Police, to give them, call it frictionless access to this network of Ring cameras. So if police want to really easily request footage from a certain part of town, from a certain camera, Amazon can put them in touch with the owner of the camera. And there have been tens of thousands of requests from police departments across the country for this footage through Ring.
So, Hoga, let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So they don't get the footage, but they get who owns the machine, or who owns the camera to be able to request the footage.
Yeah, so it's a couple things. So there's this app, this like social media network to which Ring owners can post footage, and police can be part of that application and part of this sort of social network as a user. And then if police want to request specific footage, say within a half-mile radius of where they think some sort of incident might have taken place, they can put out requests to users. And so there was first, this amounts to a real dragnet of surveillance access that we haven't seen before. It's a private network of surveillance cameras that police can infiltrate really easily.
Right, and I'm sure it's way down in there in the terms of service for people that use the Ring system that they just say okay to, and don't realize they're giving that permission.
Yeah, well, yeah, and at least there is a sort of consent mechanism going on here,
Right.
but the full implications of this picture aren't always made clear. And the second piece of this is there's been reporting, for example, there's an NBC News report that says an investigation into the effectiveness of these Ring cameras, and it's pretty clear it's not like police are adopting these agreements with tech giant Amazon and suddenly there's a correlative impact or decrease on crime. There's not a lot of evidence that these agreements are effective, but there is a lot of evidence that police are getting a whole lot more footage from citizens as a result. So, these agreements across the country have been a real cause for concern for us.
Right, I can understand that. I mean, it is like, I don't know. I mean, that one doesn't seem. It just seems like it's lazy cop work, if anything, because it's not like, at least on the cop shows that you watch all the time, they're always like, they're walking out like some crime happens, and then they walk around, and if it's in a business area, they knock on the door and be like, hey, can we see your camera that's pointing outside? Seems like that Ring one is at least the same thing. It's just lazy. They don't have to go out and do it. They just make some phone calls. Still think it's kind of gross. I'm not saying it's not gross. I'm just saying it just seems like something that's already existed. It just gives them a lazy way to do it.
Yeah, I think like with aerial surveillance, where if it used to be that you flew one helicopter and everybody was able to see the helicopter and you knew the helicopter was loud and there was only one helicopter and there was one camera hanging off the helicopter. Now you can fly drones using higher tech surveillance that's quieter and in secret, and it's a lot more frictionless for police to do it. In the same way, I think Ring is an acceleration of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the broader implications of creating those kinds of dragnet surveillance networks, it's a really different approach. And
right. And it's a step towards just, you check the box in terms of service, and the KPD, for example, just calls up Ring and says, hey, we need footage from this place at this time. And they start leaving the owner of the camera and or the business or the residence or whatever out of the loop. And then at what point does it get to, I mean, again, in the full dystopian version of it, you fall down the rabbit hole here, which I guess on the surface could seem crazy. But again, like you said, if you look into the history of this kind of stuff, at what point is it possible for a KPD officer in their office building to just pull up your cameras in your house? It doesn't seem like it's that far off if they're already this far in.
Yeah, I think the future is scary quick when you think about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it starts to sound a lot like 1984.
Right. For again, that being the, I need to read that book again. It's been a minute. And so, okay, so obviously the core point of this webinar, as well as you talking to me today, is to try to start to illuminate this to the public and what's actually going on. Are there policy items that you guys are putting into play in 22 or planning or trying to get into play into 22 to try to curtail some of these issues?
So, as I mentioned, we've sought to get CCOP's community control over police surveillance laws on the books in cities across the country. We've had conversations with Councilwoman Parker, who will be at the webinar on Thursday, about trying to move that forward at the city council level and trying to get a law like that on the books. These laws are really, and to take a step back, this law is a really simple ask, and it's not a very radical ask of cities or even of police. The mechanism is this: if police want to obtain some new surveillance technology, or they want to use a surveillance technology in some new substantive way, they got to ask the city council for approval. That's it.
Right.
And the idea there is they can't acquire it in secret, so it's more transparent. And you've got elected officials who are providing a say on this.
Right.
So you bring an accountability mechanism to your citizens and to your residents.
Right, because I was just like, as you were saying that, I was thinking about it because, again, talking about the drone stuff, I mean, I can't remember what exactly. There's a threshold for items. I don't know. I don't remember how it breaks down in the city part of it. I know for our county, for our sheriff's office, if there's a single budget item over X, he has to seek permission from the county commission for approval. And I was just thinking in my head, like, these drone things are probably cheap enough that they fall under the radar of that needs special approval cost thing. And so this forces it, instead of it needing to be specially approved on a cost basis, it's more of a functional basis.
Yeah, and for example, the Ring agreement, and I also don't mean to diminish the cost of some of these technologies. I mean, they can run up, into the many tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But, Ring, for example, that agreement with Amazon didn't cost KPD a dime, but there wasn't any public accounting for that agreement, and so something like that would have to run through the city council. And we see police surveillance as a uniquely concerning issue now, but also this accountability mechanism only becomes more important as this surveillance technology gets better and better and better and more effective at looking and peering into people's private lives.
Right. Man, this is getting depressing. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I mean, this all started for me by misreading the county commission agenda item because they were doing stuff for the sheriff's office helicopters, which, again, like, it's one of those weird things that, like, it's like, again, there's so much gray area in it, and it's once we allow part A of this surveillance to go, and it's like, well, am I allowed to do things in my backyard that you can't see from the street, but you can fly a drone up over my house and see it? Where does this, the drones over public, it's in public space, but it can see things that normal people can't see in public space. And, those kind of, I don't know, like, I fall down the rabbit hole real hard, and I always lose. And again, like I said, it's just none of your business. I'm allowed to have things that are none of your business, none of the state's business, none of anybody's business. Mm-hmm. And this idea that people just kind of say okay to it because they don't really put thought into where it could lead. And I think that's an important thing that I think a lot of people, when they're talking about this, don't go down. You can't go down too far because then people think you're crazy. But, it's like, this isn't far off from X. And then it starts getting really sketchy. It's already really sketchy, but, people like to kind of somehow justify it out like we were talking about earlier. I'll give this up for safety kind of thing. Okay, so the three big ones that KPD is doing, it's the license plate reading, recording, data stuff, drone usage, and this Ring camera agreement.
And I'll quickly add a fourth.
Sure.
This isn't something that we've confirmed they are using, but there was a budget request from KPD on facial recognition technology.
Right.
That they were hoping to acquire facial recognition technology.
Right, because we just put body cams in as a requirement, and then we had a whole mess about getting access for the community for a body cam for a particular event. And then it would just be that license plate data recording, but with your actual physical body. Right, that's the idea of this facial recognition stuff. Same thing. I'm walking down the street, and a police officer has his body cam on. His body cam catches me, knows who I am because of the recognition software. There's a data point that says I am at this place at this time, and then they can start, just compiling that as well.
Can track anybody anywhere based on the biometric read. Now, currently, big problem with facial recognition tech is that it's not necessarily that good. And it is particularly bad at identifying folks of color with accuracy.
Racist cameras, so it's messed up.
Yeah. So we've seen wrongful arrests based on misreads, facial recognition technology misreads. We had a case, I believe, in Michigan that arose out of exactly this problem. That somebody was wrongly, a black man was wrongly read as having committed felony larceny and then arrested and held for a couple days. So facial recognition technology is bad now, in part because it's bad, and as it gets better, it's also bad.
Right.
Because
it's bad now because it's not particularly functional. As it gets functional, it gets intrusive.
Yeah, and you can track, like you said, you can track anybody anywhere.
Yeah, that didn't help my depression that you're rolling me into right now.
Well, the good news is there is, if we can get some mechanisms in place that just bring some of this into the light, we're not necessarily there yet with constant tracking of everybody by local police, but some simple mechanisms in place.
Okay, so
can help stop us from getting there.
All right, so let me ask you this: if you know, and if you don't, I understand. But because again, one of the things that I'm trying to understand as the layperson is how does specifically the expanded drone usage that KPD was asking the state to give them. How does local authority versus state authority over the police department kind of shuffle out? Could we put something in place like this, and the KPD's like, well, the state says we can do it, so we don't need your permission whether you give us it or not? Or would that be more? I guess the sheriff's office would fall under that one for sure. But just kind of some of the balance of authority, I guess, over the police department. Is there any issue with because again, that's one of the things that concerns me about it, because there's the KPD asked the state for it. They didn't ask the city for this particular drone adjustment. So how much authority does the city actually have over KPD in this kind of situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer. So this is not some definitive legal opinion. Our understanding is that jurisdictions have the power to restrict the types of surveillance technology in the possession of the police department. Nashville, for example, has had a CCOPS law on the books since 2017.
So even though the state has expanded, or I don't remember if they passed that one or not, but even if the state expands usability, the local jurisdiction can't move into that expansion without permission of the local city authority, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'd caution against.
Right.
But our understanding is yes.
Okay, because again, one of my things is always who am I supposed to talk to about this problem? Is this something that I need to go to a Massey or Manus or one of my state reps, or is this something that I stay local and talk to a Parker or one of the other city council members that's going on right now that actually has the authority to do something about it? I think that's one of the issues that we as a constituency struggle with the most is I don't know who's in charge of this thing.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we've targeted this out, so the state has certain restrictions in place on some surveillance technologies. For example, they expanded the list of allowable uses of drones, but they still have restrictions on what drones presumably cannot be used for. I think a big reason why this effort, the CCOPS effort, has focused on communities is because we want communities to have the control over how they're being surveilled. And so we want cities to be looking themselves at their police departments and saying, this is close to home. How can we exert some control? How can we create some transparency and accountability and set community standards around what's okay and what's not when it comes to surveillance?
Right. Okay. I mean, again, I follow the logic on it. It's just, like I said, it's one of those things that I've continuously struggled with the further I get into any of the issues that we get into talking about different stuff, is that it's city, county, state, federal, all kind of pile on top of each other. And it's well, okay, this is KPD. It's the body of the city. So the city should be able to take care of it. So that helps clarify that point for me at least. I don't know, man. What's, so I'm assuming some of what we've just talked about is kind of the agenda for the webinar. What else is going on at the webinar that people should tune in and take part in it to get it to just, why should people come on Thursday at what, 5:00?
Yep. Or 6 o'clock Eastern.
6 Eastern. Okay.
Yeah. I'm in Nashville. And so I get that confused all the time. I hope folks come to the webinar. We've got national experts from the ACLU to talk in depth about some of these surveillance technology issues, including the history of police surveillance, much like the history of over-policing. As I mentioned, police surveillance has often been used to target communities of color and low-income communities, from, FBI surveillance of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, all the way up to surveillance cameras in Lansing, Michigan, pointed at Black residential neighborhoods, or disproportionate placement of ALPR cameras in Oakland toward Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and tracking of the cell phones of Black residents in Baltimore. So, we'll have some conversation about that history, and then we'll also have some voices from Knoxville community to talk about the impacts of over policing and their thoughts on police surveillance as well. So we hope, that this is opening an important conversation around police surveillance in Knoxville, and also that this is laying the foundation to get some real protections on the books for Knoxvillians to ensure transparency and accountability in the future.
Right. I like that. I think that's important. I hope that everybody can take part in it. Is there, obviously, as you mentioned, Amelia is working on something to get into the city council agenda to talk about some of this approval process. Is there anything that we can do currently after we go attend the webinar or before then, as far as contacting any different representatives, making this issue a little bit more known to start with, to help us get towards some of the solutions we're talking about?
I think if you go on our website, you can see a longer explanation of some of these technologies and their use by KPD. I encourage everybody to go on our national organization's website and just sort of poke around and see what's out there, and look at surveillance technology through the lens of like, what would I be comfortable with in my community?
Right.
And I hope folks come to the webinar on Thursday. I think we'll talk more about calls to action in the future, and once there's legislation coming down the pipe, what people can do to make sure their voices are heard on this issue. Yeah,
it's a fun one too, because we're in the middle of city council races. And so for those of you that are, a lot of the candidates are out door knocking and stuff. And so if you happen to catch this and they come knock on your door, ask them what they think about it. See how some of these candidates feel about KPD's surveillance usage, and whether or not it's something you want to continue, because these people that are asking for your vote are the people that can make some changes to at least make it our decision as a public, instead of some kind of behind the scenes stuff that KPD and the state and that kind of stuff does without our knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's it. This is super interesting. What else do you want to talk about? Let's talk about football or something.
Yeah. Big year for the Titans coming up.
We'll see. Are you you're gonna have to deal with this stupid race and whenever this Grand Prix is?
Yeah, it's coming up this weekend. I
saw the map.
It's going to be a spectacle. I have no idea what to expect. But it's definitely about to take over the city.
I mean, it's kind of neat. I mean, it's a cool thing to do, I guess, if I didn't have to work or something and have traffic to deal with because of it. But it's usually, what is it, Sunday morning?
I think when I looked at the event, it said it was 3 days. I have no idea how they're filling 3 days, whether they'll just keep racing or something. It's just 72 hours and you don't get out of the car. But I'd assume there's like a time trial or something going on.
Yeah, that the different portions of the track that they'll have to shut down for a period of time. What a random transition. Okay. So I don't know. I just don't like. And I think this illustrates the issue is that like I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it. We're planning on doing this kind of thing, and it's like, well, what do I ask? What do we talk about? Obviously I knew there was some specific agenda stuff specifically going on with the point of this webinar and stuff like that. I knew that was coming, but it's like, I got a chance to talk to somebody, and it's like, what do I ask? What do I ask? Because there's so much, but there's so much I don't know even where to begin to ask, I guess is the way to say it. It's like, I've got a big issues with some of the, like, I've been following this, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping story a little bit, and talking about police kind of doing some things that I don't think they should be doing. And it's like, well, how do we do this? This is okay that the FBI was helping fund a kidnapping attempt so that they could arrest the people for kidnapping. It's like, doesn't that seem like a trap more than it does an actual stopping anything from happening? That kind of stuff. But I don't know how much that applies. I don't know. It's a crazy time with all the things going on, especially with how much technology is part of our lives now, and how easy it can be, if we're not paying attention, for all of that to be record for the state, whether it's police or just the state in general, tracking you as an individual.
Yeah, it's scary. It is new, and it's happening fast.
Right, faster than any of the handful of people that actually care about it in elected offices can do anything to change it.
Yeah, and I think, it's elected officials have all kinds of demands on their time, and it can be hard to keep up with rapid changes in technology. And it's hard for anybody to keep up with all the developments that are happening every day. And so as police get better and better and better, as governments get better and better and better at using these technologies and adding to their surveillance arsenal,
right.
It's about just having some mechanisms in place to slow that down.
Right. And this might not be the best example to put up, but it's like, think what you want to think about the January 6th incident and how many people are being found all over the country that happened to be there that day, that took part in some level of this thing, and are being tracked down from all over the country through a lot of this, general surveillance, whether it's using other people's pictures that they post online, or whether it's, direct cameras that were there on the site and stuff like that. Again, it's not an opinion on what I say January 6th was or wasn't, but the ability to pick apart individual people out of a crowd and all that kind of stuff, it's frightening.
What I'd say is also with this CCOPS effort is that it's not that law enforcement can't have these technologies, whether it's drones or whether it's cameras that are catching people who have done, awful things like some of the folks who participated on January 6th in the riot. In the insurrection. I mean, it's not that law enforcement can't have some of these technologies. It's to open up a community conversation around those technologies and put an approval mechanism in place that brings it into public view, that weighs some of these trade-offs.
Right.
And now, one caveat to that is a lot of the bills that we've put forward or that we've advocated for have put in place, or we've sought to put in place, explicit bans on facial recognition technology, which we believe is a uniquely dangerous technology going forward. And so there may be tech that communities are like, absolutely not, never.
Right.
But the point is a public accounting.
Right. So at least we get to say so, not it just happens and then we realize it a year later that it's already happening. Mm-hmm. Right. I follow what you're saying. Well, all right, man. Is there anything you want to throw some plugs in for how to get it? I've got the your guys' website, the Tennessee chapter, in the show notes, and I'll put it in the official notes here in a little bit. for people to link through there. Is there any other things that you'd like me to add in the show notes for links or contacts or anything like that?
Like I said, please join us on Thursday for the webinar. You can head to our website for more information on surveillance technology and our website for more information on the CCOPS effort. And we hope you'll look into this. We hope to raise some awareness, and we hope you'll get in touch with folks and let them know how you feel about this issue.
Awesome. All right, everybody, that's what I got. I will put some of this stuff in the show notes for you guys to get easy access to learn some more about it. And it's outro time.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate your time today. Again, I'm not going to butcher his last name because I will. So Jack S, everybody from ACLU Tennessee. Really appreciate him coming on, explaining some of the specifics, what they're trying to do with this webinar to highlight and illuminate some of the things that are going on right here in Knoxville with our police department. That in some opinions it should, in my opinion personally, a lot of it crosses the line, but at least having it out there in public where we know what's happening and we are agreeing to it happening instead of it just happening when we're not paying attention. So we're almost in agreement at gmail.com. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. Go to our website, almostinagreement.com. You can get all the episodes there, as well as your favorite podcast provider. While you're at any of those places, please like, share, subscribe, follow, retweet, whatever the thing is that helps spread the word around. We're trying to get as much information out to as many people as possible in our uniquely odd way of doing so. So we appreciate everybody for listening. Again, I thank Jack from the ACLU Tennessee for coming on and helping us. And if you can, on Thursday evening, check out the webinar. It should be even more in-depth and some more details and cool stuff that we didn't talk about today. So appreciate everybody for listening. Have a great afternoon.